why I'm easy. I'm easy like Sunday morning.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'm Ann for the morning, and it looks like the gang's all here this morning, which is wonderful. Let's see, do we need to go around and say names?
I think
Yeah.
so. I think you do.
Yeah, okay.
Marty Gorham, member at large.
Mirta Janos, Parks and Rec.
Carolyn Singer, representative from the Historic District Commission. Heritage Commission.
Ted Howard, trustees of the trust funds.
Gail Carey, member at large and chairing for today.
Rachel Gazowski from Parks and Rec.
John Carroll, Durham Agricultural Commission.
Neil Slepian, Conservation Commission.
Darrell Ford, Town Council.
Veronique Luddington, Land Stewardship Coordinator.
Thank you. And Neil will make you a voting member today? Do we need to do that?
Oh, yes, because John naturally
is not here. Okay, yes. And we have a guest?
Linda.
Oh, sorry, Linda Kuhn. I live here in Durham. I recently applied to be on the Parks and Rec Committee and ran into Veronique a couple times this fall, walking trails in Durham, and thought I'd just come and sit in on this meeting and see what it's all about.
Wonderful. Well, welcome. And Sarah. Hi. Welcome. Yeah. Do you want to say your name and?
Sarah Callahan. I'm an alternate on the Land Stewardship
Wonderful.
Committee.
Good to see you. Okay. So, we need to approve the meeting agenda. Are there any changes to well, first of all, a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Second.
Any changes to the agenda? The only change I could see was that the next meeting isn't March 12th, as it's stated at number 8 on the agenda. The next meeting is in April, but I didn't make note of the date. Does anybody know what that is offhand?
April 9th.
Yeah, looks like the 9th.
The 9th? Okay.
9th, yeah.
9th. Okay, so if we could make that correction, I guess, in the agenda. Okay, I'll approve, because we can take since we're all here. Okay. Anybody not approve? Any abstentions? Okay, so approved. Next item on the agenda is to approve the February meeting minutes. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
One item on the minutes. I'm listed as both present and absent.
Hey, that's the trick.
That is possible.
That sounds accurate.
I attend meetings that way all the time.
That may be very accurate, John.
That's good.
Which one was it?
You were absent, okay. Okay. Any other changes? I had just a couple of spelling errors for what it's worth. I think, Rachel, your last name is misspelled?
Oh, with an I, missing an I at the end.
An I at the end.
Yep.
And bridge improvements at the Oyster River Forest. And then item 6, Mirta, his name is misspelled.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Any other changes to the minutes? Yeah? Okay, approve the minutes as amended. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? One abstention?
Yeah, I wasn't here.
Okay. And so approved. Welcome, Todd. So moving right along, the next item on the agenda is e-bikes on trails.
Gail, just a point of, I guess, process, and that is if I need to be voted or approved as a voting member today, if they're as an alternate,
Okay.
I would assume that potentially I'd take Anne's absence, right? But,
I'm not sure.
right?
Yeah, so
Any-
typically what happens, if a member's missing, the chair can designate one of the
Designate.
alternates as filling in, sitting in for that full member.
For that member,
So you could,
okay.
if where Ann is absent, you could do
Okay,
that.
okay.
Right.
So Sarah is designated as a voting member today, for today's meeting,
There you go.
in lieu of Ann.
Yes,
Okay,
great.
yeah, all right.
What did you say?
I thought Neil, did she,
Oh, no, well, Neil is,
From
Conservation
Conservation Commission.
Commission.
Okay,
So it's a
okay, sorry.
different role.
yep.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah. So moving on to e-bikes, there's a handout going around. And Neil and Veronique, do you want to?
Yeah, Veronique is going to lead us off
Okay.
on where we are in terms of the research. I just want to say that Veronique has done a lot of really in-depth research on the possibility of using e-bikes on the trails, connected with the surrounding towns, and to see where they are on the topic of Newmarket, Lee, and Madbury, and also has done this research on the e-bike classifications and what different state and federal lands and parks permit or don't permit. So the purpose of this discussion is to get the issues out there, see what other entities are doing, and make a decision on what direction we want to go on that. And ultimately, what we would like to do is to coordinate whatever policy we develop with the surrounding towns, because so many of the trails either cross town, cross from one town to the other, or are, adjacent to them. And, as Veronique pointed out when we met to just discuss this topic yesterday morning, even if trails don't connect from one town to the other, people will often use their bicycles in one town and then another, so it just makes sense that that the policies coordinate. So with that, Veronique, you're on.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, also for sending me some updates yesterday
Oh, sure. yeah.
on what you found. So I'll just, we went over that, I think, 2 meetings ago, January, but I'll quickly go back over who does what. So at the national level, on BLM lands, for example, e-bikes are allowed on the roads and trails that authorize non-motorized travel, but it's only if it's been authorized by the BLM manager. So it's basically up to kind of like local properties, and it's not like a blanket cover. It's allowed on all their trails. And that's the biggest take from doing the research. It's basically, there's kind of like a general rule, but it always leaves leeway to the local or designated land managers to make the final decision on what trails to allow the use, or like a seasonal. So that was kind of like a little caveat to the rules that are usually on the website. If you dig deeper, you'll find that, for example, state parks in New Hampshire allow bikes and e-bikes, but if you go down the page, you'll see that 2/3 of their state parks actually do not allow or recommend bikes, period. So therefore e-bikes. Some close the trails for seasonal, for mud issues or erosion issues. Fish and Wildlife authorizes bikes only on basically their paved trails. So like the entrance road at Parker River Refuge, which most people are familiar because it's pretty close. Great Bay National Wildlife Refuge, it's only on the entrance road. And I'm talking about bicycles. Therefore, if bicycles are not allowed, e-bikes are automatically not allowed. Most of the entities assimilate e-bikes class 1 and 2 as having the same rules as bicycles. So class 1 and 2 are basically the e-bikes that don't really go over 20 miles an hour. So it's pretty much assumed that if a bicycle is allowed on a path, then the class 1 and 2 e-bikes are also allowed because they are considered as bicycles. The Fish and Game is working on codifying rules. They still haven't come to a resolution on their wildlife management areas, which we could kind of assimilate to our conservation lands because they're defined as the same purpose, public access, but also keeping the natural resource for wildlife. And so it's around us, have already decided. There's only New Hampshire and Vermont that are basically outstanding on making any decision about e-bikes. And most states have just decided that if a bicycle is allowed, they also allow class 1 and 2. More locally, the Forest Society says that e-bikes are not allowed on non-motorized use trails, same as bicycle. But most of these entities you'll find never really name e-bikes on their website. There's if they have an icon for saying no bikes allowed or bike use restricted, they'll never really differentiate bicycles and e-bikes. So that's why it's kind of hard to find information on real e-bike use. Most land trusts don't differentiate between e-bikes and bicycle also. And I found a sign, I was looking on the Southeast Land Trust website to see what they allow. They allow bike use on some trails, on some properties. That's something we discussed with Neil. They actually have like Piscasig Greenway. Some of the trails allow bicycles and some of their trails on there don't. So on one property, they differentiate trail use on that one property, which is interesting. So the question is, since they allow bicycles, but it's never clearly labeled, do they allow class 1 and 2 e-bikes? Because New Hampshire state law defines, basically categorizes e-bikes 1 and 2 as the same as bicycles. So that's a question. And Nature Conservancy, which, for example, obviously we share the Sweet Trail with a different partners, and Nature Conservancy doesn't allow bikes in most of their preserves. Therefore, so they are probably the most restrictive on that use. And this discussion has brought me to also want to talk about trail use signs in Durham on our properties, because we really don't have definite. We have trail use signs, but I was going to show people. So that's the Forest Society trail use sign on their properties. And there's one on the Sweet Trail on their portion. It's actually pretty explanatory with the little icons and really defines what's authorized, what's not authorized. And I think that should be at some point the second part of the discussion, which is would people like to see better signage on trail use, allowed and not allowed? Right now, it's kind of like at one property, it's just written. There's no icons, like at Wagon Hill, there's just a sign with like 3 written allowed, not allowed uses. At Stevens Woods, there's icon. So different properties right now, it's not really cohesive as far as like when people show up at the property, there's a map, and then there's either like a sign on the side, and it doesn't really list everything. So I would strongly advocate for coming up with a sign that we can modulate to each property, depending on which property we want to see, what use we want to see at which property, but having the same icons and having the same display, so it kind of sticks better in people's mind, and it's easier to read. It's easier for people to be like, oh, I know at this property right away I can see I can't use my bike, or, I think that would be worthwhile discussion. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Bernie. So what we want to do is basically to decide, do we want to allow e-bike use on our trails or not? So I think the first part of it is, basically what we learned from Veronique is that other organizations and entities that allow bicycles also allow class 1 and 2 e-bikes. So as you see on the handout, class 1 e-bike, in order to engage the motor, you have to be pedaling, and it won't go over 20 miles an hour. A normal bicycle, a person can go 20 miles an hour or more. I think on a mountain, on trails, people would rarely be able to go 20 miles an hour just because of the terrain. Class 2 is exactly the same thing in terms of the motor size and the limit of speed. The only difference is that you can both use a pedal and a throttle, like on a motor scooter or something like that. So with that, I'd basically like to open up the discussion and just hear people's opinions on.
I just want to clarify, Neil, that actually those bikes can go over 20 miles per hour. It's that the motorized mechanism, so either the pedal or the throttle, stops working after you hit that 20 mile per hour mark. So you could end up going downhill much faster than 20 miles per hour. It's just that you no longer have that assist. And then
Okay, but I'm sorry, but just so I understand, so you're saying that the bikes can go more than 20 miles an hour, but you cannot go more than 20 miles an hour using the motor unless you have basically like a gravity assist.
That's right.
Okay.
Or you're right. As soon as you start pedaling, you could be pedaling and going more than 20 miles per hour, and that pedal assist will no longer be helping you go over that 20 miles per hour. And then I do want to, I got asked this question by a couple different towns back in December and January, so I had done some initial looking into this. And I do know that the CELT does not allow class 2 bikes. They actually only allow class 1 bikes on the same trails they allow their own bikes on. So they've differentiated. They actually tested the different bikes out on the trails and determined that the impact of a class 1 bike was similar to a regular mountain bike. So they did not see the difference between those two to warrant there being a different classification other than bicycle. Matt Scacia from the Forest Society says they classify like e-bikes essentially as a motorized vehicle, but because their base policy is that bicycles are only allowed on motorized vehicle trails or roads,
Right, it doesn't
that
make a difference.
it's a wash, right? But they do view them differently than a regular pedal bicycle, just as a
Okay.
kind of a nuance to keep in mind.
No, that's good to have all that, all the information. Yes, Carolyn?
Can I ask a dumb question? If this were a historic property, there would have been, I don't know, easement restrictions, I'm not sure of the terminology you guys would use, stewardship agreements that prohibit the use of, have we all checked all the agreements? Or don't you have it set up that way in conservation?
Can you clarify your question, Carolyn?
Well, so you're wondering if like there's a conservation easement or restrictions that overlay the fee-owned property, that whether that would prohibit bicycles. Traditionally, those types, every easement is different. Not every one of the town properties has a conservation easement that restricts recreational use or access. And when they do, some of them allow or require bicycle access, but prohibit motor vehicle
Motorized,
access,
right.
right?
So do we know that for each property where there's a trail, what the restrictions are?
Yeah, I mean, that's within that spreadsheet. There's a spreadsheet that and Gail and I worked on.
Okay.
That have within there kind of the deed restrictions or associated with any conservation area in town. So, you know, you'd have to go back and look at that spreadsheet, but you could find it, yeah.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think-
where is that?
For the last year. I didn't bring my computer, my personal computer with me, but
Yeah, she shared it with me when I first started. I think I can share it again with everybody.
Okay.
I'm not sure it's on here. It's on my personal because I didn't have this computer when she shared it.
Veronique, when you share that, could you turn it into a PDF? I think one of the issues some of us have is using a Google Doc.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't use Google Docs.
Well, it's because
Basic-
it's a more live or flexible document that way.
Yeah.
So if it becomes a PDF, it's stagnant and you can't make
Well, you
changes
can,
or updates.
the background piece could be, the working document can be either a Word or a doc, but
Yeah.
That
in
can be
terms
a
of getting
snapshot.
circulation to the membership, some of whom cannot use Google Docs, a PDF works better. And a one-time snapshot of what it looks like right now. And other towns around have for their policies.
Yeah, Veronique has spoken to them, so please.
So right now, it's kind of like a mad rush that everybody's trying to work on codifying this. Nobody has come to any resolution. Some towns like Newmarket, I talked to Ellen because I saw her last week at a conference, and they are going to try to push that on the agenda, but right now there's really nothing that has come to fruition. And I'm waiting to hear back from Madbury. And the person in Lee said, Mary, who had contacted Neil originally, said they're just starting to have talks about it. So as of now, towns assume just don't restrict more than those bikes. E-bikes class 3 are obviously not allowed, right now. But nobody has delved into even writing, that e-bikes, they make a difference between e-bikes and bicycles. So that's where it's at. So Ellen was warmed up to the idea that we could have a joint meeting with Madbury and maybe Newfields and us to discuss, to just start a discussion. So that we could have maybe come to a conclusion that matched, each other's, so it's easier for the public to remember and use once it's put in place. But that's where it's at. So I think everybody in in the conservation world, in the, managing lands, recognize it is becoming an issue because there's more and more on the market and more people are using them. But it's just like the infancy steps, I feel, of making decisions on that.
Yeah, I think it's important to, not only because we might share trails, but if one town's policy is less restrictive than another, then you're going to end up with substitution. It raises the question in terms of enforcing a policy, how easy is it for the casual observer to differentiate between a class 1, 2, 3, and 4?
And do the owners even know what they have?
Do the owners even know what they have? It's
Oh, I'm
all-
sure the owners know.
Do they?
The
Okay.
Oh,
owners
yeah.
know, yeah.
Yeah.
The owners know,
I
yes.
think, but I would agree. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think
How you enforce
you
it, yeah.
can't create I mean, I think it's easy with the class 3 because that's state, that's a state law, right?
Right.
But with class 1 and 2, I don't think you'll run into issues of enforceability. And I think the only way you might be able to differentiate a class 1 from a class 2 based on the sound, but not by much, I don't think.
Even the design of the new mountain bikes, if you look at them that are out there now, they have a very beefy frame to them, which could look very similar to an e-bike, and it's not. So I would say it's very hard to tell. And I will just note too that following this meeting today, I have the opportunity to go meet with several of the other area recreation departments. And e-bikes is on our agenda today. So I'm hopeful that folks from Stratham Parks and Rec, they'll be there today. They typically are. I'm sure they're dealing with this on their trails. So hopefully after this meeting next month, I have a little bit more information that I can share with the group on what some of our surrounding communities are doing or facing, or if they're starting to talk about it, so.
Oh, that's great.
I mean, I think the other part of this that is missing is, there's also fat bikes.
Right.
So in general, the use of bicycles and where they go and how far they go is in increasing recreational use, and it's become, and I know that Seth is dealing with this in Stratham Hill Park. It's become a year-round sport or activity, and so the impacts in use have just, not just the numbers, but the intensity and also seasonality all of those factors are increasing bicycle use on trails where they are allowed.
I'm reminded of, speaking of restrictions and the like, Percival Baxter gave Baxter State Park to the state of Maine, or to the people of the state of Maine, in trust before there were snowmobiles. And then the technology created snowmobiles, and the question came up, would they allow snowmobiles in the Baxter State Park? And at least happily at the time, Percival's brother was still alive and could interpret what he thought his brother would have liked, and they said no. And so they don't have, it was forever wild. But this is like a new technology, and even if there were some restrictions in the past, it's kind of outside of that box. So I'm glad we're having the discussion to try to get ahead of this before it becomes an issue, not unlike the dogs, which are running wild, and policy not only for all of the lands here in the town, but also coordinated with the adjoining towns, I think will be well served. And signage to help people understand that what's allowed and what's not.
Very good. Todd, you had a comment before?
Well, I guess a question, I'm still riding in my 12 speeds, so I'm really not familiar with all the e-bikes, but is there a big weight difference between the class 2 and the class 1 that would create more impact on the trail? Or are they pretty similar?
I think class 1 and class 2 are pretty similar. as
Yeah,
far
I
as
don't
the
actually
frame.
know the answer
Yeah.
to that. It's a
Yeah.
good question.
Yeah.
Probably could look it up pretty quick.
I just did a quick search of
Pretty similar.
bike company that I'm familiar with, and like Philbrooks, they sell a number of these bikes, so they're easy to look at. And if you look at an e-bike versus just their regular bikes, whether it's a mountain bike or a road bike, they look very, very similar now. They're very hard to tell the difference of, yeah, you would not be able to tell in some cases if someone was.
Does it say anything about what the weight is of an e-bike or in class 1 and 2 versus
I'm
just
sure,
a regular mountain bike, conventional bike?
I'm sure I can find them. They're certainly expensive.
Because I know they are heavier, so that is an issue, is, that I think we need to at least touch on is, if it's heavier, it's certainly going to, do more damage and do more trail erosion.
I mean, some of these are like carbon frames, so I'm assuming they're.
I know, I don't know if they've done enough research to understand if there actually are differences in trail impacts between the two different types of bicycles. So I don't want to jump to that conclusion.
Yeah, good point.
And-
But you said that the
and I
Nature
think-
Conservancy, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, my understanding is really it has to do with the ability for those types of users to get more miles on their bicycle. So their impacts are kind of spread out over a greater landscape. So now instead of somebody being able to go out and bike 6 miles, they can go out and bike 10 miles. And so they're having that much more additional impact on your trails versus the weight impact. That's my understanding, but I don't actually know they've really looked at it.
So just bike that they have here, the e-bike is actually lighter, 42.9 pounds, and the mountain bike is 49.29 pounds.
Who owns a 49-pound mountain bike? Are you sure? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's saying weight, 49.29 pounds.
Not anybody I know.
They range from 40 to 80 pounds.
Mountain bikes?
No.
You got some info on
E-bikes.
that?
I guess the point Sarah's making is really important, is that to understand that if you have an e-bike, you're on a trail that maybe they wouldn't have tried with their regular bike. So it definitely adds use, therefore possible erosion, disturbance to the wildlife. So I think my question would be, we have those lands for public use, public enjoyment. It's also not very nice when you're like walking casually, listening to the birds, to have somebody zip by you at 20 miles an hour. And I don't see that feasible on a lot of the trails we have, just because of topography. But it doesn't mean, there's a lot of things we think impossible that ever end up happening. So it doesn't really mean anything. So that's really the questions. We have those conservation lands for a purpose, and allowing, like, especially the e-bike, the class 3 e-bikes, to me is just like, not having any signage about e-bikes kind of gives a signal that free for all right now, So,
Well, according to state law, they're a motorized vehicle, right? So a class 3 bike would not end up on a trail, because I think most e-bike users recognize and
Right.
understand that they're only allowed on road systems.
right. I just feel like if there's no signage, if we act like we not even know about e-bikes, or we don't even, address the e-bike issue, then it just like leaves leeway. There's some people that don't, that are just going to go anywhere because there was no sign. There was no, I understand the enforceable side is really hard. But on the other hand, I still think like we should work towards having a more defined use of the trails on that regard.
Yeah, that makes sense. Todd?
Yeah.
There are some properties like Wagon Hill Farm where we don't want bikes, because of the ecosystem. I think there are some properties where there are trail bikes that are out there being used, and we haven't had an issue. So if we are going to allow bikes, if that's the threshold issue, then the question is, what class are we going to allow? And it seems from what we've said that there's not a lot of difference between 1 and 2. So those perhaps would be allowed 2, but not beyond class 2. So 3 and 4 would be out. And I think the other thing is, like, a lot of residents, I think when people go to buy a bike, they're just looking to get a bike, and they might go for the e-bike because it gives them the ability to have more mileage, or they don't have to pedal as hard. It's maybe more enjoyable. So if they have a bike, and they want to go out on the trail, then I think we have to be kind of open to that. So, like, at first when we started talking, I was thinking of like kids in, out there going crazy, but I think it could be anybody who's just going out to enjoy themselves. So I think it's sort of, are we going to allow a bike or not? If we allow the bike, are we comfortable with the class 1 and 2 to make it kind of easy for residents? And then having just basic, clear signage. It's allowed, it's not. Because if we don't have the signage, then people are just going to come. And then we won't like what we get, I think.
Yeah, and go ahead, John.
I have two questions. One is, did anyone look into the National Park Service and whether or
Yes.
not the national parks allow?
Yes, so national parks allows class 1 and 2, and they're pretty lenient about allowing bicycles. Therefore, they allow class 1 and 2, and it clearly states on their website, basically their thinking process was, the parks are pretty big. They want people to cover as much terrain as they can during a day, and they recognize that e-bikes have definitely been a big help for people to be able to discover more of the state park, the national park, when they are there. So they actually, their website talks a lot about e-bikes, and
So e-bikes are permitted on trails in the national parks,
yes, where they allow bicycles, yeah.
where they allow
And
bicycles.
and they are very kind of encouraging on the website about the use of e-bikes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
John, do you want to share what you sent out this morning?
Oh,
or-
yeah, I grew up in a world that basically had signage that said no motorized vehicles allowed on trails and things of that sort. That would include all e-bikes of all classes because they're motorized. And I also grew up in a world where New York State is my home state, where I grew up and spent my early years, and they required license plates on any motorized vehicle if you were using public roads, and presumably public trails as well. I can't swear to that part of it, but certainly public roads. If you kept the vehicle on your own property, you wouldn't need a plate. But you don't need a plate in New Hampshire for a car if you don't move the car off your own property. It's when you enter public roads that the requirement of a license plate comes into place. So in any event, I don't know that we're talking about license plates, or if the states will start figuring that's a new area of revenue to require license plates if you have motorization of any form and are using public roads. So that's one thought that I had. But it seems to me that the use of motorized vehicles of any kind on the trails in our town lands would be pretty much against the purpose of the trails. The purpose of the trails is nature and physical exercise. So if we're using the trails for a lot of walking or perhaps jogging or something of that sort, that's an appropriate use. And obviously for bird watching or nature study of any form in these lands. But e-bikes seem to work against that. Use of motorization of anything seems to work against it. And of course creates a little bit of a certain type of sound, a motorized sound, and not that they're all that loud. I don't mean to say that. But they provide a certain type of sound, which is noticed by the birds and other creatures in the woodland. So I think that it would be quite appropriate for us to say no e-bikes on the trails. And of course, the trails are often in a situation where they are going to be damaged by bicycles of any kind, if the bicycles are used with the mud situations of that sort. So I think that's something to consider. And I don't think we should necessarily be influenced by the behavior of surrounding towns on this. We have our own jurisdiction to deal with. What they do is their business on their own lands and so on. So I think we should just make an independent decision that has nothing really to do with.
For you then, so do you think that regular mountain bikes, you know, a conventional non-motorized mountain bike, has the same detrimental effect
It can have.
to the trails as a motorized
Yeah,
version?
the answer to the question is it can have. Where the public gets involved is the motorization versus no motorization to a greater extent. But also, grew up in a world where no motorized vehicles allowed is a very common type of sign. And that would obviate the class 1, 2, 3, 4 conversation. Motorized is motorized. But yes, certainly mountain bikes could cause certain damage to the trails. That is not necessarily caused by foot traffic.
Do you think they would have the same effect on wildlife as you described?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, because an e-bike has an engine, and it sends out signals, sound signals that are recognized by wildlife, whereas a regular bicycle has nothing like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you have a comment?
Can I just make a couple comments? So I think from a wildlife impact, what you're looking at, for those of you who did not attend my webinar last Wednesday, the foot traffic and bicycle traffic, their impacts on a trail are different, but essentially similar. One does not make a greater impact than the other. They're just different types of impact. Okay, so and they've done a lot of. There's been research on how your foot lands. The biggest difference in actual trail impacts are between horseback riding, which is significantly greater than a mountain bike or a pedestrian. Wildlife impacts are, they really vary. And some of that has to do with the speed. So if you're going fast, even like a trail runner has more impact, more like a bicycle, than somebody walking. Somebody walking really slow, like a bird watcher or wildlife observer, actually has greater impact on wildlife behavior because they're seen more as a predator. And actually dogs have the most significant impact on wildlife by far, like by multitudes. That's across the board research. And off-leash, obviously much more than on-leash. So I think there is a misconception about the impacts that any individual is having out on a trail as a pedestrian or on a.
Could
throw that
you share your
clarification out.
webinar with all of us?
Yes, yeah,
I appreciate
sure.
that.
I think, Veronique, did you attend the webinar?
Yes, I
Okay.
attended it, and and it was great. And it's part of it is in a brochure that's called Trails for People and Wildlife that was
Yes.
published by the New Hampshire Fish and Game. That is very good at explaining what Sarah just talked about, which is basically a bird watcher, which is a person standing for an amount of time in a designated spot, will disturb wildlife eons more than somebody running or biking through the area because it will be seen as a predator. I can share and I can send the PDF of the Trails for People and Wildlife. Is very interesting.
So I think, I tend to agree with you, Todd, about how I think class 1 and class 2 bikes are not having significantly more impact or on our trails. I think that makes sense to allow class 1 and class 2 bicycles where we allow for mountain biking on our trails. And you were asking about what trails allow bicycles. So there's what allows bicycles, and then there's also the component of where in general are they used on our conservation lands. So I've seen them come in and out of Stevens Woods because they're connecting to the UNH trails. and through Bodette and onto Doe Farm. So those are two properties where we see mountain bike use. Long Marsh Preserve, I have seen bicyclists out there, and bicyclists are not allowed on the Sweet Trail. So the bicycle access really is just on the town's own land and along the Long Marsh Road, which is a Class 6 road. Oyster River Forest sees mountain bike use, and it originates from the town's parking lot, or it can originate from, and is there another one, Veronique, maybe, besides those 4 that we really see mountain bike use on?
Yeah.
So it makes me think that some of this is more, as Veronique pointed out earlier, she contacted the Forest Society and Fish and Game and Nature Conservancy because of that Sweet Trail collaboration we have at Long Marsh Preserve. But we also have these other properties that adjoin UNH land. And I don't think UNH has a e-bike policy.
And they actually, like we went from Stephen Woods to West Foss Farm, and right, yeah, and
East Foss.
East Foss Farm, sorry, and he had signs there that were discouraging bike use on certain trails that are, because of the topography and everything, and basically the signs were taken down, and he's had a hard time even enforcing that. So they haven't really touched on that at all. So maybe and I agree with you too, Todd, about, what you said. If we allow bikes, then it should allow class 1 and 2. So maybe the question around is, if we review we had also talked about, I thought what was done on the UNH property, saying you're on your bike on the main trail, and then there's a couple branching trails, and all of a sudden it says no bikes on this trail. That's so hard to make it respected that it's kind of almost pointless. So Neil had asked the question, maybe some on a separate property, do we allow, if we allow bikes, do we allow bikes on all trails? I see Selt has on Piscassic, but it's very big, and they say, well, trails on those bikes allowed on this trail, but not on this trail. I think that becomes too convoluted. So I just think maybe we can go over each property and see what makes sense about allowing bike use or not as a blanket cover.
Veronique, do you think that should be a separate discussion for
Probably,
for this
yeah.
committee to go property by property?
Yeah.
And then make a decision as to whether bikes are allowed?
Yeah, just review what's allowed right now and what the state goes with, which is e-bikes class 1 and 2 are allowed where bikes are allowed. Then it would make sense to just have a quick review of where are bikes allowed in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good idea.
And also just what you had mentioned, Veronique, about updating the signage at the trailheads, clarifying that, that these trails, bikes are allowed here, bikes are not allowed here.
Right, that's why I think it's a separate discussion, both subject could be broached at the same time.
And just to extend that, I think that information online would be really helpful. I think before people lug their users, bicyclists in New Hampshire go to find out where they can take their bikes or where they can take their e-bikes? Or is that they have to search out each place they want to go and find
there's
them?
the New Hampshire Bike Alliance website that has a lot of information for them. Let's see. Yeah, the Bike Walk Alliance of New Hampshire has actually a lot of information for e-bike owners. But then I think you'd have to, kind of search property by property, or go on the state park website, for example, to figure what's allowed, what's not allowed. We have on the town website, each property has its own page, and there is a list of allowed uses and not allowed uses. my kind of like little remark about them is they are written, they don't have icons, and everybody's going to having icons just for the ease of readability by the public in general. So most people will not spend the time like looking. So then if we change the signs, we could also put those on the website with the maps, along with the map.
Put the actual signs on, like a picture of the sign, you're saying?
Yeah, of the PDF of the
website.
design of the site or the sign that matches each property, like along with the map.
Okay.
Jim Lawson and I created like a summary with allowed use icons on it. But when Craig couldn't quite get it because it was in a PDF format to be easily seen on the website. And so I don't know if I've shared those files with you, but it was made in a PowerPoint presentation, so why don't I share that with you?
Yeah.
And maybe there'd be a way just to take that copy and then paste it, instead of having it as a PDF, copy it out of the PowerPoint presentation and just paste it right on the website. And so it would be fairly easy lift, maybe for you and Craig to
Yeah, for
figure
a
out.
start, great, thank you.
We have that on our website.
Yeah, Anne got copies done, and we passed them around town. So they're at the library, and they're at RAC, and there's some here at the town hall.
And the icons are helpful. I like
I
that.
think so.
Okay.
I have a question. It sounds like we're kind of thinking that the 1 and 2s are essentially the same as a bicycle, and if we allowed bicycles, we'd allow those. What do we do with places like the Oyster River Forest, where you've said you've seen bicycles? I've been out there quite a few times. I've never run into them, but I'm sure they use it. But no motorized vehicles are allowed on the Oyster River Forest. I mean, if you either have to separate them or not.
Well, I just want to make, I guess this brings up another question is, I think that my understanding of where we're going with this is that we don't want to change the rule about no motorized vehicles on the trail. So the question becomes, do we consider e-bikes to be a motorized vehicle? Or do we consider it to be like in a separate class in between manual and like a regular motorized vehicle? So I know that Veronique has some opinion on that.
Well, it's not an opinion. The state of New Hampshire does not categorize electric bikes as motorized vehicles. They're considered personal electric vehicles. So theoretically, they're not considered as a motorized vehicle. That's why you don't have to register them. That's why all that. So per se, yes, there's a motor, but as far as a category, as far as the state is concerned, they're not considered to be a motorized vehicle.
Okay, but you just brought up something interesting, which maybe we don't need to touch on this meeting, is that there is a category of PEVs, personal electric vehicles, right, which also includes, motorized scooters,
Segways,
motorized skateboards,
yep.
motorized unicycles, like all these things with wheels that didn't used to have motors, but they do now. So I think before we come to any conclusion on what we do, a final conclusion to make the recommendation to the Conservation Commission, we should also talk about at some point, do we want to include an opinion or a ruling on PEVs in general, not just e-bikes? If somebody wants to use a motorized skateboard on a trail, I don't know, I guess they'd have like a death wish if they wanted to do that, but should that be allowed?
Or a wheelchair.
Oh,
A motorized
that's a good point,
wheelchair.
too. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
really
that's a
good point.
PEV. That's considered a PEV.
Yeah, okay. So it seems to me that we kind of have two avenues. If, number one, just to kind of summarize the discussion, one point of view is that if we allow bicycles on a trail, then we should allow class 1 and 2 bikes, as at least the state doesn't consider them to be motorized vehicles. So if we go along with that opinion, we would allow class 1 and 2 bikes on trails. And as a subset of that, we want to go through property by property at some meeting and make a decision as to whether we should or should not allow any type of bicycles on the trails. The second opinion, or the other end of the spectrum, which John expressed, is that we should consider them to be motorized vehicles no matter what the state or the surrounding towns do, and not allow them on the trails due to the potential impact on either other people using the trails or on wildlife.
What we seem to need is a legal definition of a motorized vehicle, which is accepted as the legal definition in the state of New Hampshire. We know that these are motorized vehicles, whether or not the state says anything about them, simply because there's electricity.
It's a motor.
There's a motor. So there's no question they're motorized vehicles, and the state has the right to come up with a legal definition of motorized vehicles, and that's probably what we need, because they've not come forth with any kind of a definition of that sort.
But yet they don't require that to be registered.
Right.
Because you brought up the point about the license plates.
And they could easily require them to be registered. Maybe that'll be coming.
Yeah. Well, like a motor scooter, like, the students used to ride around.
Yeah.
Those little, motorbikes that they used to ride around. Those had to be registered. Those have license plates. But they were a gasoline-driven engine.
Yeah.
So, certainly we wouldn't want to have anything that has a gas engine out on the trails.
And this is electric, but an electric motor is a motor.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. But not according to the state in terms of being the same kind of motorized vehicle.
They just haven't gotten into it,
Yeah.
I think. I don't know that
That
they've
could be, yeah.
declared that.
Mhm.
I think they just haven't gotten into it.
Okay. What did you find out, Veronique, that they don't consider them to be motorized vehicles, or that they haven't made a
Correct.
decision?
They don't consider them to be motorized vehicles, so they're in a different category. They call them electric-driven vehicles, and that goes with basically the federal, the national, what everybody's doing nationally at different state level and federal level. They are starting to discuss class 3 to possibly change the category so that they could require, like you say, maybe a license plate. They do definitely require that you are 16 years old to ride a class 3, and they have a couple of requirements coming on the surface. But as a general rule, they define them as a different category than motorized vehicle. So therefore, if you say motorized vehicle allowed on that, forbidden on that trail, it doesn't include them. They're considered bicycles, just electric-driven bicycles, but they're not considered as a motor vehicle. So, and that's what obviously everybody is going with that, assuming class 1 and 2 are basically a bicycle with an electric, driven motor. So.
Yeah, I guess the question I would have is that would a class 1 and 2 bike have any more of a negative impact on trails, wildlife, or people than a non-motorized bike? And so maybe if we can just, I don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody have an opinion? I know you do.
Both have impacts. The non-motorized obviously has an impact. And there are a lot of places that say no bicycles allowed for that kind of reason.
Yeah, which, we may come to it when we go property by property.
Well, in terms of the impact, initially I had made the assumption that e-bikes the class 1 and 2 would be much heavier than a traditional bike, but we've
Right.
learned that's not the case. So
Yeah.
weight alone is not going to be a factor. Then you get to the issue of speed, because the e-bike could potentially allow you to go faster, but as Veronique said, the trails are such that you aren't going to be able to go full out on an e-bike on these trails. That you may be able to go 5 miles an hour. I don't know how fast you go.
Depending on,
So, but will you hear the pedal assist? And I've heard them, and there's a little bit of a, like there's a, like an electric noise as it picks up speed, but I just don't know, I don't ride them, so I don't know if that even kicks in, pardon the pun, at a slow speed, you know? I don't know. So my bet is it's a de minimis difference between a traditional bike, a class 1 and class 2. When you get to class 3, you're in a bigger machine, so it seems like that would be heavier and you could do more damage, I don't know.
Which we, at this point, you know, based on the discussion and on the definitions of the 4 classes of bike, we wouldn't even consider anything beyond a class 2.
Right. And then my other follow-up question, Sarah had mentioned something called a fat bike. What is that? What is a fat
Oh,
bike?
fat tire bike.
Yeah.
Oh,
Those are the ones where you see where they've got the really big knobby tires
Like
on them.
balloon tires.
Yeah, yeah. And those can really add some ruts in wet conditions. You know, I think really the Forest Society discourages bicycle use of their trails really during the most part. A mountain bike user recognizes that the mud is an issue and has those impacts. So some of it is just making sure you put the trail infrastructure in to compensate during those times of year, or to ask that the use is eliminated or limited during those times of year. So.
Right. As the landowner / manager, we can always decide that a trail at some point in time during the year, if there's too much precipitation or whatever, the state of the trail does not is not good for user bikes, and we could put a temporary sign. A lot of the parks and other places do that. Just a temporary sign for a month for the time for the trail to dry up, or so there's not added damage, So that's something we can do on a sporadic base, if we see that a trail is really getting damaged by use. We could do that as far as a little slighter restriction, to benefit the trail.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And maybe instead of a temporary sign, we could just say no mountain bike use on trails between mid-April and mid-May or something like that. So
I mean, like on our roads.
yeah, right, yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's a good point, Veronique. Yeah, excellent. What was I going to say? I don't know. So
I think we should all try out e-bikes. I have not yet tried one. Has anybody here ridden an
Yeah,
e-bike?
I've tried that stuff.
All right, so Gail, I want to hear, what did you think?
Fun, very fun.
Yeah.
On
Did
the
you do it on a
roads, I
road?
would never take it on a trail.
Yeah.
It's just, I would be too,
What-
but I'm
what
not a
class?
mountain biker.
What class bike did you ride?
It's a 2.
Class 2, okay.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun. It was a gift that I thought I would never use, but once I got on it, it was just a lot of fun.
Terrorizing our neighborhood, right, Marty?
You are?
Black leather and stuff.
But I would take it on like a rail trail, paved only.
hardly.
Yeah, that's just my preference. I feel much more safe. I
Yeah,
would
and
never take it on a trail.
Yeah, and I wonder, and Veronique, you've tried one? But, so there's also a trail bike, right, there's NIMBA, that is a bicycle organization, and they have a unit in the Seacoast area of New Hampshire. I'm wondering, did you reach out to them at all about kind of how they're communicating this to their members?
I didn't, so that's a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't think of
Anyway, or where they're at. I think we should all try out an e-bike.
I'd like to say a couple of things about this. And I'm going in a number of directions here. I was out at Stonehouse Pond last January. It was a cold winter day, and the trails there were very icy. And I came upon a person who actually was a neighbor, a faculty neighborhood neighbor, on a fat bike with spiked tires.
Yes, yeah.
And
Isn't that crazy?
if you get into springtime conditions, that would be a bike, I think, that could do some damage. Now, going back to when we did a site walk here at Oyster River Forest to look at the trail and the bridge, while we were there as a group, someone rode by us on a mountain bike that was an e-bike. It was an electric mountain bike. And it had some pretty good-sized tires. It wasn't a fat bike. But, so the use is there. The bike wasn't very noisy. I think it's very, for most people, I think for me, it's almost hard to distinguish a regular bike from a low impact, say a class 1 or class 2 e-bike. The batteries are in the tubes. They're, for a lot of these bikes, they're kind of cloaked. But another part is for a lot of people that have mobility issues, the use of an e-bike might be the only opportunity they have to access some of these areas. So whatever the final decision is made, like an electric wheelchair, is that not allowed? Or is it, do we want to, if we want to make the trails accessible, I think for older people that have, or regardless of age, people that have some mobility issues, the use of an e-bike could give them access. So
Okay,
let's keep that
thank
in
you. Yeah,
consideration.
good point.
I just wonder, was it Gil Carey on this bike with the spike
That-
tires?
that
So,
The
Marty,
spikes on the helmet too.
like the Forest Society, Southeast Land Trust, a lot of those organizations that have these policies, have created policies about e-bikes in the last couple of years, always have a caveat that there's, that anybody with mobility issues, there's exceptions to using these electric and motorized vehicles on their property.
Nevertheless, for the society, it would be a good one.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, does anybody else have any more comments? Because I'd like to, since we've talked about this quite a bit over the last hour, I don't know whether we're ready to take a vote or just a show of hands on which direction we would like to go or what we'd like to, draft as a proposal for our, for the regulations, or do we need to wait for more information? So, but first of all, does anybody else have any more comments in general or thoughts or anything they want to say?
I would support what Todd and Sarah and Veronique has had to say, and I support the use of electric bikes, the 1 and 2s, if we're allowing bikes on trails,
Okay.
from a recreation standpoint, and something that we'd be happy to bring up as well at our upcoming Parks and Rec Committee to have further discussion on.
Okay, so I guess the question is, should we wait for that discussion, or are we ready to kind of take a vote now, make a motion, or I guess I don't know I think that the next step is we should vote in some way, whether it's informal or whether it's on a motion. What do you think, Ted?
I would not vote at this point. I think we have a general sense, I think, that Class 1, Class 2 bicycles are the same. I think we need to have a better look at what our individual properties might be and get some information from some of the other towns. So I think we need to have some coordination, because if we don't, if adopting a particular, if everybody else says no way and we say yes, then every e-biker in the world is going to be on our ground, right? For miles around. So I think we need to have some coordination with our adjacent towns, particularly where we might share trails, and certainly see what UNH is going to do. If this takes us another few meetings, another few months to get going, that's fine. I'd rather get it done right than have to go back and revisit. So I think we need more information, but I think the general direction is fine. But I don't think we're at the stage where a vote of any kind makes any sense.
I wonder if okay, so 2 points. From what Veronique has found out, we're ahead of the directly surrounding towns on this issue because they haven't even really met as a group to discuss it. So what I was hoping to do was to come up with the direction we would like to go in. And Veronique said that she would set up between her and, who's the new one? Ellen Snyder, to set up a meeting of, the representatives from the other towns and see if they would want to adopt our recommendation or if they have some other things or, other ideas. But yes, your point about coordinating it between all the towns is, absolutely the direction that we want to go in. So
Well, I'm comfortable with a sort of sense of the meeting
Yes,
kind of idea,
exactly.
but that's as far as I'm willing to go at this point.
Okay, so how about just maybe a show of hands and not a motion or anything to be voted on, but just an informal show of hands as to the direction we would like to go. So if I could summarize that for the show of hands, I would say that at this point, this subcommittee is recommending that on any trails that bicycles are allowed, that we allow class 1 and 2 bikes. And for our purposes, we're going to review each property individually and make a recommendation on whether bicycles should be allowed on those properties. So can we get a show of hands as the people who are in favor of adopting a policy of where any bicycles are allowed on our trails, that we also allow class 1 and 2 bikes? All in favor? Raise your hand. Oh, you're in favor? Okay, great, okay. Okay, so it seems like it's unanimous.
Okay.
Did I miss anybody? Did you raise your hand?
I don't vote.
Well, you can have an opinion.
I don't vote either, but I'm in favor.
So just to clarify, Neil, our next meeting hopefully will be looking individually at our properties, those that allow bikes, and just so that we can refresh our memories
Yes.
as to which of our properties allows bikes, and view it through the lens of how does that look if we include class 1, class 2. And
Yeah.
so I feel like that needs to happen first before we can move forward with how we feel, even if it's just an informal show.
Any
of hands.
policy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly any policy. And so the show of hands, it's clear we're all on the same page about this at the moment, but I feel it might be premature to take it any further than that at
Yeah,
this
for
moment.
sure. I would agree. And also then we'd have the benefit of having Rachel's input from your meeting.
Yeah. Daryl?
Which may change our opinion. And, just when we get into the fine tuning of it, we can also talk about what Veronique proposed about not allowing bikes of any sort, during, for certain months during what we would call mud season,
Okay.
which that would be a change of the policy right now.
Right. Daryl, did you have a
Can
comment?
we make sure we get that spreadsheet again? I just looked through my computer and I couldn't find it, so.
Oh,
No,
each
the one
property,
that
yeah.
you referred to.
Yeah,
Sarah?
Do you
yeah,
you
yeah,
have that, don't you?
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
You have it?
Either
Okay.
Ann or I shared it with you
Okay.
Yeah.
back
So
in
having
January or
that
February.
sent
I know
out
it was
to
a while
everybody.
ago that we shared it, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll transform it so it's more readable.
Okay.
What hasn't come up in this conversation is non-differentiation between motorized and non-motorized. What if there's a significant increase in bicycles, whether they have motors or don't have motors, on the trails? And what impact would that have to the walkers, the hikers, nature, the physical condition of the trails, not just mud season, but if there's heavy usage, that will be very obviously visible on the trails, and we'll have a different trail situation in that way. And I'm not differentiating between the e-bikes and regular bicycles. So it's kind of an argument in favor of some kind of limitation on bicycles in general on the trails.
See, and then I think you get back to Ted's point earlier, like, as soon as you open the doors to allowing dogs off leash at Wagon Hill or on leash, it becomes this very popular location for dog walkers, right? I hear that that's what the concern is. That if we do this, that we open the door for greater impacts just from the number of users that we see.
That's right.
And the potential increase in conflict between different types of users. And
Well,
there
I
are
think we're
some
gonna
ways
have
to address
increase.
that.
Right now, the increase is gonna happen anyway.
Right.
E-bikes or regular bikes, whatever, if biking becomes more popular, it's gonna happen, period. That then brings on the later conversation of, all right, are we getting so much damage at some places where we wanna say, yeah, no to bikes, period, just, but that, I think that's further down the road.
Okay. Okay, so I have a question for the next meeting is how can we get a list of each property that, so we can go over them, one by one to determine whether we think bikes should be allowed or not?
Property, what uses are allowed for that discussion, I'll make it separate. Yeah.
Okay. All right, good.
Yeah, and Sarah, I have that, what you're talking about, you were talking about, where there's the icons for trail
Yes,
use.
yeah.
I know, that's the one with the blue lines.
Yeah.
I have that.
Oh,
yeah.
I did share it with you.
'Cause
Okay, great.
That's when we first met, that we
Okay.
discussed that, actually. So,
Okay,
yes.
great.
Yeah,
And I
thank
just
you.
want to say that you could take a look at Beaver Brook Association in Hollis, New Hampshire, for some of their maps. They have their benches identified, picnic tables, everything on these maps, on these trail maps.
Oh.
And their picnic table and whatever amenities are marked. And I think there is just a start. I saw it on one of the maps. I don't remember which one, but yeah. So I
Yeah, I
think,
worked with the nature groupie interns
yeah, so that's
a
something
year and
in
a half
progress,
ago
I think.
to collect a lot of that
Right.
data to pass on to Steve
Yeah,
Letterman.
so I think that's a work
to
that's
improve
been
the
started.
mapping.
I think at Jackson Landing, some of the things are marked and yeah. So.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? We know where we're headed with this. Yeah? And anybody that would like to try riding an e-bike, just let me know. And item number 5, Stewardship Coordinator Update, Veronique.
Yes, so I'm just gonna update you briefly on what I've done so far and what's in progress. I just recapped that with Todd a couple days ago, last week I think. So Gail, I want to thank you for giving me the list of volunteers and trail stewards, etc., people who had responded to the survey, I believe. I got a fantastic rate of return. I'm still getting returns. So far I have 32 people that have connected back with me. Some people have never actually gotten to volunteer. A couple people had moved out of the area that had responded to the survey and said, sorry, we moved. Some people have forwarded the email to other residents. A lot of people who work at UNH have actually forwarded the email to other people that were not on the list. So far I feel like I'm starting the season with a great pool of volunteers. And I had asked people to respond by March 15 so that then I can kind of like start scheduling half work days and things like that. So that was very positive. I have started updating the town website, so the Land Stewardship page with either new photos or there was information that dated back from like 2019, activities that had taken place. I'm trying to like kind of freshen up all this. So I've spent time taking photos on all the properties and I'm working on that. As we go, I've been given some for the Friday update and then I wait for it to be published to then put on the photos on the website, just to have like a little new things on there. I met with Sarah and Erin to discuss the Discover the Durham Trail Walks, the next one. So I think Sarah and Erin have everything kind of finalized with Rachel for the spring, which is exciting, the next 3 walks. We had talked about Spruce Hole Bog, I think at the last meeting. So I met with Alex Contosta. She's the professor at UNH who's heading the research that's being done, the Arctic research that's being done at Spruce Hole. And she's gonna come and speak at our next Land Stewardship meeting. So she'll speak about the project. She sent me the poster that was done by her student. And so there's a lot of material there that we could use to possibly make a sign. We had discussed about doing that, so that we have more information about what's being done there, what are the captures for, why do we tell people not to walk down to the bog. So I think that will be a good addition and for knowledge for all of us, and then we can transfer that knowledge to the public on the website. I met with Steve Eisenhower from UNH following the issue that was brought up by Baudette, which is the Fish and Game property. So we walked all the trails and identified the issues, and Steve and I are going to work together to rectify that. We're going to try to brush in the entrance of 2 of the rogue trails and try to move the signage so it's more, it directs people more to the direction we want them to stay on, which is the official trail. And we also identify a couple issues like on the map that we have at the Stevenswood kiosk, which also identifies the trail on the UNH abutting property, connecting property. There are some new trails that are not on there yet, and so we'll need to work on that so we can have a map that's accurate. So then maybe it will help with the confusion when people end up at an intersection, and instead of taking the rogue trail that's there, they'll continue on the official trail. But I guess that's an ongoing issue, all these rogue trails that connect to the abutting property. And we also talked about the trail markers at Oyster River Forest, the ones that are being removed, and he had some good advice, said to either nail them down, flush in the tree. I know the tree is going to grow around, but it doesn't, then people can't pull the sign, or try to screw them instead, use some screws with one of those odd star bits that people can't easily remove. So I think we're going to go with screwing them with an odd shaped bit and see what happens with that. So we'll see what happens with that. I made a list of all the things that are either, have to be done for kind of each property that I want to tackle as soon as spring comes, and start reaching out to volunteers for help for that. I walked Wagon Hill North with Anne and her husband, and we talked about, what's been done there. And then I walked there with Patrick Fitzgibbon. He's the New Hampshire Fish and Game wildlife biologist that's working on the cottontail, the New England cottontail rabbit. Reintroduction, sorry, looking for the word. And they've had pretty good success on some properties close by, and so they are looking at that maybe for next year or the year after. We talked about, Sarah had a suggestion about maybe using a grant from the Moose Plate grant that's going to become available this spring to do some additional timber cut to open up more habitat for the rabbit on the north part of the property. So we talked about that, and Heidi Holman, who's in charge of the project, is going to get back to me. She's going to probably come by and look at the area and give recommendations. So that would be, because NRCS, they have no money to do any of that work, but we have the property, and we want to make the best habitat, so that would be a nice. I'm working on trying to organize a bio blitz, which I had talked about with Rachel a little bit, and Erin and Sarah in the fall. And that's, doing citizen science, leading a group for half a day in one of the properties. And UNH Cooperative Extension supports that, with materials, like binoculars, and you can borrow a whole kit. Plant identifying kits and things like that. So we thought that would be a nice thing to do in the fall, as far as an outing conjointly with the Parks and Recs. And on the bridge at Oyster River, so we got the data check back, and obviously there's some endangered and threatened species around in the 1 mile radius from the bridge that we want to, elevate, extend. So I'm gonna be retrain, and I are gonna meet permit in good timing so that the DPW can help with the project, with the funds that we have that was allocated, the $10,000. So I'll keep you posted on that. And I'm also working on a poster for looking for new volunteers that I'm gonna put at the library and other places. Together, just like a poster saying, hey, we're looking for more volunteers. Because the bigger pool we have, some people can't work during the week. Some, people can only work in the evenings or on the weekends. So I still want to expand the pool of volunteers because it's always nice to, when you're looking for just 1 or 2 people, to reach out and have somebody help on some of the projects for the trail maintenance, taking care of the trails.
If you wanted a lot of volunteers at one time, there are a lot of corporations and banks that utilize volunteers. It would have to be Monday through Friday during a workday.
Yep.
They'd need training and deal with working with volunteers. But there are a lot that are looking for things for their volunteers, their employees to do.
Yep. Thank you.
Veronique, could that call for volunteers also go into the Friday updates?
Yes, I'm designing a poster right now, and once it's done, I'll just give it to Todd and Karen and put it in the Friday updates. Yep.
And is it for volunteering just for trail maintenance, or are there other tasks that you're looking for?
For now, I was just thinking trail maintenance,
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And every trail steward that has responded so far said they are willing to continue. There's only one person, I think, who wanted to switch property, who was tired of doing the same property for the last 8 years. The person who's doing Merrick, who's yes.
Is that Sally?
Sally?
Yes.
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 Sally.
Yes.
Needle.
Yes, but everybody else was fine with what they were doing. Yep.
Yeah, wonderful.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you,
Yeah,
Veronique.
thank you.
You've been very busy. Thank you so much. Committee updates, item number 6. Should we go around? Your turn.
Oh, Parks and Rec did not meet this past month, so I have no update.
No update?
Work has begun on Wagon Hill Farmhouse, the Bickford Chesley House.
Yay! That's great.
Let people know that you support it because it's going to be, an interesting project.
Okay.
And what's the timeline for that?
I think they're planning on opening or finishing the rehabilitation by November, December, but we probably won't open the exhibit until after the winter, so.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Nothing new with the trustees of the Doe Farm, so moving forward.
Okay.
Parks and Rec in partnership with Conservation and this committee, we have our Discover Durham's Trails coming up on Friday. Full Moon Walk. Do you know who's leading that, Sarah?
Danielle Herman.
Danielle Herman. And that's going to be at
nobody's gonna
Oyster
know her.
River
She's a dear
Forest.
friend of mine who is a science teacher at Epping Middle School, and she's done a lot of work for the AMs, leading that walk on Friday.
Friday evening, right?
This Friday, yep.
This Friday.
And then
Yeah, we'll look forward to getting the spring series, get that list from you guys, you and Aaron, up and posted. So we'll get the next round.
yeah, we're waiting.
out there.
I'm just waiting to hear back from a potential field trip leader about a specific date. So
Perfect.
I think that's what we're holding off on. But April is I'll be leading a vernal pool walk at Thompson Forest, which I think I did a couple years ago for the committee. But it'll be more it'll be open to the public, and then either Tom Ballestero or Dave Burdick and Rich Rain to do like a field trip about out Wagon Hill. That's looking at the mitigation of the saltwater marshes out that way, and the saltwater project, marsh project.
Great,
Very good.
great, thank you. John?
The Durham Agricultural Commission is collaborating with a group of UNH undergraduates on new surveys of local food and farming and how much support would be given by townspeople. I think there are as many as 200 townspeople going to be involved in that.
Nice, nice.
That's it.
Wonderful.
That's great. Conservation Commission, we're continuing to work on the updated ordinance for the wetland and shoreland overlay district. The main point of discussion at our last meeting was making sure that our list of invasive species is on the Durham website. So for example, when Rich Ryan was here the last time, he talked about his group and in terms of their dealing with invasive species, and we just want to make sure that his list of invasive species is the same as ours, so there's consistency. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I might have this information wrong, is that on Friday at the full moon, it's supposed to be a blood moon, where the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon all line up. And if you go out and look at the moon, if it's visible, I think on the East Coast it's around 1 o'clock in the morning, so set your alarms. It's going to look like a deep red color, which should be pretty interesting. So I'm definitely going to set my alarm.
I'm not setting
I think it's
mine.
closer to 2:30. I actually hold on a second.
2:30?
2:30 a.m.
I have it right here.
It's about 2 o'clock, I know.
Eastern time, it begins at 2:26 a.m. and then ends at 3:31 a.m. And I believe it's between, yeah.
What's the date on that?
Great.
So you'll let- it's
Blood
Friday
moon.
night.
March 13th
Friday
into
night
the 14th.
Into Saturday.
So that's Friday, right?
No.
Oh, no.
That's
No.
Oh, is that tomorrow?
I believe it's Thursday into Friday morning, so it's very, very early Friday morning.
Oh, okay, so tomorrow
It's not
evening,
Thursday,
night.
it's Friday.
Yep.
Yeah, Friday early morning, right.
Also happens to be a no school day for my kids, so they are all on board with waking up early.
Yeah, we can all meet at the mill pond.
Yeah.